The morning air in Oak Ridge Park was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and pine. Lena Carter tied the laces of her running shoes. Her movements practiced, her mind elsewhere. Her body, honed from years in the Navy SEALs, moved with precision, but her heart carried the weight of something heavier. Retirement hadn't been the reprieve she'd imagined. She glanced at the playground where children's laughter often filled the air. Today, it was eerily quiet. The park felt unusually still. But Lena dismissed it. She shook her head, brushing away the lingering paranoia that had shadowed her ever since she returned to civilian life. Her feet hit the gravel path, her pace steady. Each step was a mantra, a reminder that she was no longer in hostile territory. Yet, a voice at the back of her mind whispered caution. The first sign of trouble came near the old oak grove. 3 men emerged from the shadows. Rick, Bulldog, Harris, a hulking figure with a shaved head and cruel grin, stood at the center. Flanking him were 2 others, Mitch, Scruff, Taylor, wiry and jumpy, and a younger man Lena didn't recognize. His features twisted in a smirk that screamed overconfidence. Lena's stride slowed. "You lost, lady?" Rick drawled, stepping into her path. His voice was thick with mockery, his intent unmistakable. Lena stopped, her gaze sharp and assessing. Years of training kicked in, scanning for exits, threats, and weaknesses. "No, but you're about to be," she replied coolly. Rick's grin widened. "Feisty one, huh? Thought you'd be quiet and scared. Guess we'll have to teach you some respect." Lena's heart rate didn't spike, but her muscles coiled. "Ready?" She noticed the tattoos on their arms, symbols she recognized from military briefings on domestic extremist groups. This wasn't a random encounter. "Last chance to walk away," she said, her voice steady, her tone a warning. Rick laughed, a low, guttural sound. "You hear that, boys? She thinks she's the boss here." The first blow came from her left, a rookie mistake. Mitch lunged, telegraphing his movement. Lena sidestepped effortlessly, grabbing his wrist and twisting it with precision. A sickening pop echoed as he crumpled to the ground, clutching his arm and screaming. "Get her!" Rick roared. The young one came next, swinging wildly. Lena ducked, driving her elbow into his solar plexus. He collapsed, gasping for air, his overconfidence shattered. Rick charged like a bull, his fists like hammers. But Lena was faster, calmer. She used his momentum against him, pivoting and delivering a sharp knee to his ribs. He staggered but didn't go down. "You're tougher than you look," Rick wheezed, wiping blood from his lip. "You have no idea," Lena replied, her voice icy. Rick pulled a knife, its blade glinting in the morning sun. The stakes shifted. Lena's pulse quickened, but not from fear. Her SEAL instincts took over, her mind calculating every move. When Rick lunged, Lena caught his wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the ground. A swift kick to his knee sent him down, and she pressed her boot to his chest. "Enough," she said, her tone final. Rick's eyes burned with fury, but he didn't move. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Lena stepped back, watching as Rick scrambled to his feet, dragging his injured comrades with him. "This ain't over," he spat before disappearing into the trees. Lena exhaled, the tension finally leaving her body. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. By the time the officers arrived, she was already recounting the incident. Officer Logan, the lead responder, listened attentively, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You handled yourself well," he said, glancing at the grove where the fight had occurred. "But this doesn't feel random. You think they were targeting you?" Lena nodded. "Their tattoos, symbols tied to hate groups. This wasn't a coincidence." Logan frowned. "We've had reports about a gang operating in the area, but nothing concrete. If you remember anything else, names, faces, let us know." As Logan walked away, Lena caught sight of Rick's discarded knife. Etched into the hilt was a strange insignia, a coiled serpent encircling a burning cross. Her gut told her this was bigger than a gang of thugs. Later that evening, Lena met Emily Parker at a small diner. The journalist's sharp eyes scanned the crowd, her notepad ready. "You said you had something for me," Emily said, leaning forward. Lena placed her phone on the table, showing a photo she'd taken of the knife. "Recognize this symbol?" Emily's brow furrowed. "I've seen it before. It's tied to a white supremacist network, small groups, loosely connected, but growing more organized. This could be big. Lena nodded, her jaw tightening. I need to know who's behind this. They came after me today. But they won't stop there. Emily smiled wryly. Good thing you have me. Let's dig. As they began piecing together the puzzle, Lena's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person who'd been silenced, threatened, or hurt by people like Rick and whoever pulled his strings. This was a war Lena Carter was ready to fight. The next morning, Lena woke with a sharp focus. The events of the previous day replaying in her mind. The symbol on Rick's knife was a puzzle piece, and she was determined to uncover the bigger picture. Emily had texted her early, sharing an address linked to a suspected meeting spot for Rick's group. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Going alone would be reckless. Emily had warned over the phone. You need backup. I'm not involving the police yet. Lena replied firmly. Not until I have something solid. Lena arrived at the warehouse just as the sun began to set, cloaking the area in shadows. The building was in disrepair, with broken windows and graffiti marking its walls. But what caught Lena's attention were the muffled voices and the faint glow of lights inside. Moving silently, she found a vantage point near an open window. Inside, Rick, Bulldog, Harris was pacing, his face contorted with anger. You screwed up, Rick, a deep voice growled. The speaker, a man in a suit that contrasted sharply with the grimy surroundings, exuded authority. Lena instinctively took out her phone, snapping photos. I didn't know she'd be some kind of ninja. Rick protested. She's not just some chick off the street. The suited man glared at him. You're lucky she didn't kill you. Sterling's not happy. Rick, he wants results, not excuses. If she's a threat, eliminate her, quietly this time. Lena's grip on her phone tightened. Sterling. The name wasn't familiar, but the weight behind it was clear. The conversation shifted to other topics, distribution routes, financial dealings, but the mention of Sterling had planted a seed in Lena's mind. Whoever he wasn't just funding this group. He was controlling them. Lena met Emily at her apartment later that night, spreading the photos across the table. Sterling, Lena said, tapping one of the images. That's who we're after. Emily's eyes widened. Nathan Sterling? The real estate mogul? Lena raised an eyebrow. You know him? Know of him, Emily replied. He's untouchable, wealthy, influential, and slippery as hell. If he's funding these groups, it's not out of pocket. He's laundering the money somehow. Emily's fingers flew across her laptop, pulling up news articles and public records. Sterling had a polished reputation, philanthropist, community developer, family man. But Lena wasn't fooled. Here, Emily said, pointing at a screen. He's been buying up properties in low-income neighborhoods. Always after some kind of incident scares the residents away. Fires, violence, you name it. Lena's jaw tightened. He creates the chaos, profits from the fear. Emily nodded. And if he's backing gangs like Rick's, it's worse than we thought. The next step was riskier. Confronting Mitch, Scruff, Taylor, the gang member whose broken arm Lena had gifted during their first encounter. Emily found his address through court records, an old apartment in a rundown complex. Lena knocked on the door, her stance firm but non-threatening. Mitch answered, his arm in a sling, his eyes wide with recognition. You, he hissed, stepping back. Relax, Lena said, her voice calm but commanding. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to talk. Mitch hesitated, then let her in. The apartment smelled of stale beer and regret, a testament to his circumstances. Look, I don't know anything, Mitch said quickly. I'm just a small fry. That's not what I hear. Lena countered, taking out her phone and showing him a photo of the warehouse meeting. Mitch paled. You're in deep. Mitch, Sterling doesn't care about you. He'll toss you aside the second you're a liability. But if you help me, I can protect you. Mitch's gaze darted around the room, fear and desperation warring in his expression. Finally, he sighed. Fine, but you didn't hear this from me. He revealed that Rick's gang was just one of many under Sterling's control. Each group had a role: intimidation, distribution, enforcement, all part of a larger plan to destabilize neighborhoods Sterling wanted to redevelop. With Mitch's information, Lena and Emily started to map out the network. Sterling's operations stretched across the state, a web of gangs and shell companies all designed to create chaos and funnel money back to his real estate ventures. Emily's research uncovered a pattern. Neighborhoods targeted by violence were soon purchased by one of Sterling's subsidiaries. The properties were then flipped for massive profits. Lena contacted Officer Logan, sharing her findings. While skeptical at first, Logan agreed to help discreetly. "We need hard evidence," Logan said. "Witnesses, financial records, something that ties Sterling directly to this." "Working on it," Lena replied. To get closer to Sterling's inner circle, Lena orchestrated a plan. Mitch would act as bait, arranging a fake meeting with Rick under the guise of needing more supplies. The meeting was set in an isolated area, with Logan and a few trusted officers nearby. Lena watched from the shadows as Rick arrived, his demeanor tense. The conversation was brief but revealing. Rick, desperate to regain favor with Sterling, let slip details about a shipment and a coded ledger that could expose their operations. Before Rick could leave, Lena stepped out of the shadows. "Going somewhere?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Rick froze, his face a mask of anger and fear. "You again?" This time, Lena didn't fight. Logan and his team moved in, arresting Rick and securing the evidence. The coded ledger proved to be a goldmine. Emily worked tirelessly to decrypt it, revealing payments, transactions, and addresses linked to Sterling's network. "This is it," Emily said, her voice filled with triumph. "This ties him to everything." But Lena knew the battle was far from over. Sterling wasn't just a criminal, he was a powerful man with resources and connections. As they prepared to bring the evidence to Attorney Davis, Lena felt the weight of what lay ahead. "This isn't just about Sterling," she said. "It's about dismantling the entire system he's built." Lena sat in the bustling lobby of the district attorney's office, a folder of evidence clenched tightly in her hands. The weight of the information she and Emily had uncovered was immense. But it wasn't enough to bring down Nathan Sterling. They needed a prosecutor with the courage to go after a man who was practically untouchable. Attorney Davis, a sharp-dressed woman in her late 30s, greeted Lena with a firm handshake. Her reputation as a fearless prosecutor preceded her, and Lena could see why. Davis's eyes were sharp and unyielding, taking in every detail of Lena as though she were already cross-examining her. "Ms. Carter," Davis began, motioning Lena to sit. "I've read the summary Officer Logan sent me. It's a compelling start, but it's far from airtight." "I'm not asking for an easy win," Lena replied, her voice steady. "I'm asking for justice." Davis leaned back, studying her. "You have evidence of Sterling's connection to hate groups and illegal activity. But his defense team will tear apart anything circumstantial. We need direct ties, payments, orders, communications." Lena slid the folder across the desk. "We decrypted part of the ledger we found on Rick Harris. It lists payments Sterling made to groups operating in targeted neighborhoods. It's all coded, but Emily Parker is working to crack the rest." Davis flipped through the papers, her expression neutral. Finally, she nodded. "It's a start, but if we're going to build a case against Sterling, we need testimony, people who can confirm what he's done." Rick "Bulldog" Harris was the key. He was stubborn and resentful. But Lena knew that under the right pressure, even the toughest men cracked. Meeting Rick in the interrogation room was tense. He sat slouched in his chair, his arms crossed defiantly. "You're wasting your time," he sneered. "Sterling's got lawyers who'll bury you." Lena didn't flinch. "Maybe, but you think Sterling's going to protect you? You're expendable to him. Rick, you think you're part of his empire. But you're just another pawn. When this comes crashing down, you'll be left holding the bag." Rick's bravado wavered, but he stayed silent. "That ledger we found?" Lena continued, her voice cold. "It ties you to arson, assault, and extortion. You'll go down for all of it unless you start talking." Rick's jaw tightened. He looked away, muttering, "I don't know anything." Lena leaned closer. "You know everything, and if you cooperate, I'll make sure the DA knows you helped. Otherwise, you'll rot in prison while Sterling walks free." The silence stretched. Finally, Rick sighed. "Fine, but I want a deal." Davis entered, her expression unreadable. "Talk first, then we'll discuss your options." Rick revealed crucial details about Sterling's operations, including secret meetings, bribes, and the locations of more ledgers hidden in properties Sterling owned. His testimony was the crack Lena needed in Sterling's armor. With Rick's information, Lena and Logan raided a storage facility connected to Sterling's shell companies. Inside, they found boxes of documents, financial records, contracts, and encrypted communications. Emily joined them, her eyes lighting up at the treasure trove of evidence. This could take weeks to sort through, she said, already pulling out her laptop. We don't have weeks, Lena replied. Sterling's going to know we're closing in. We need something definitive now. One document stood out. A series of bank transfers to offshore accounts tied to known extremist groups. Lena's gut told her they were on the verge of something big. Sterling's empire didn't stay idle. That night, Lena's home was broken into. She woke to the sound of shattering glass and found two masked intruders rifling through her belongings. The fight was swift and brutal. Lena disarmed the first man with a precise kick to his knee, sending him sprawling. The second lunged at her with a crowbar, but Lena ducked and delivered a sharp punch to his jaw. As the men fled, one dropped a burner phone. Lena grabbed it, her hands trembling with adrenaline. When Logan arrived, he surveyed the damage and muttered, "Sterling's getting desperate." Lena handed him the phone. "Let's see what this leads to." The burner phone revealed encrypted messages between Sterling and his associates, detailing plans to silence witnesses and destroy evidence. "This is it," Emily said, her voice tinged with excitement. "We can link this to Sterling directly." But Davis was cautious. "It's strong, but it's not enough to guarantee a conviction. Sterling's lawyers will argue this is circumstantial unless we find more." Mitch, Scruff, Taylor, Rick's accomplice, was their next target. Mitch, already rattled from his earlier encounter with Lena, was easier to persuade. He confirmed Sterling's orders to incite violence and revealed the location of a safe house where Sterling kept backups of his most incriminating documents. The safe house raid was a turning point. Hidden behind a false wall, they discovered a digital archive, emails, transaction records, and surveillance footage, all linking Sterling to his criminal empire. One video showed Sterling meeting with a gang leader, discussing clearing out a neighborhood. The footage was damning, capturing Sterling's voice as he gave explicit instructions. "This is the nail in the coffin," Davis said, her eyes gleaming with determination. Lena stood in the DA's office, staring at the evidence laid out before her. They had Sterling cornered, but she knew the fight was far from over. The courtroom battle would be the hardest part. "This is it," Emily said, placing a hand on Lena's shoulder. "We've got him." Lena nodded, her expression resolute. "Now, we make sure he pays." The district attorney's office became a hive of activity as Attorney Davis and her team prepared to take on Nathan Sterling. The evidence was strong, but Sterling's reputation, wealth, and influence posed formidable challenges. Lena watched as Davis mapped out her strategy, a commanding presence at the center of a flurry of assistants and paralegals. "We're not just prosecuting a man," Davis said in a meeting with Lena, Logan, and Emily. "We're taking on an entire system of power and corruption. Sterling will use every trick in the book to discredit us." Lena nodded. "He's already sent people to my home. He won't stop. That's why we have to make this airtight." Davis replied, "No gaps, no doubts. The jury needs to see him for what he is." Sterling's counterattack began in the court of public opinion. His PR team launched a campaign to discredit Lena, painting her as a dangerous vigilante with a violent past. News outlets ran headlines questioning her credibility, highlighting her military background as a potential liability. "They're trying to make me the villain," Lena said, slamming a newspaper onto Emily's desk. Emily looked at her friend, her expression determined. "Let them. The truth is on our side. And we'll prove it." But the smear campaign wasn't just personal. Sterling's lawyers filed motions to suppress evidence, claiming the raids violated his rights. Every step forward felt like pushing against a tidal wave. To counter Sterling's narrative, Lena and Emily turned to the very neighborhoods he had targeted. They organized town hall meetings, giving victims a platform to share their stories. At one such gathering, an elderly woman named Mrs. Daniels stood up, her voice trembling but resolute. "They burned my store to the ground," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Sterling's people told us it wasn't safe here anymore, that we should leave, but this is my home." Her words ignited the room, and soon others came forward, sharing their own harrowing experiences. "People need to see this," Emily said, recording the testimonies. "This isn't just about Sterling. It's about justice for everyone he's hurt." The public began to shift. Protests erupted outside Sterling's properties, demanding accountability. Sterling was forced to appear in a deposition, a precursor to the trial. Lena watched from the gallery as Davis faced off against him. Sterling, impeccably dressed and composed, met every question with calculated precision. "Mr. Sterling," Davis said, her tone sharp, "can you explain these payments to organizations with known ties to hate groups?" Sterling smiled thinly. "I'm a businessman. I make donations to many organizations. If some of them misuse those funds, that's hardly my responsibility." Davis pressed harder, but Sterling remained evasive, his confidence unshaken. "He's good," Logan muttered to Lena afterward. "He's practiced," Lena replied, "but even he can't hide forever." Despite Sterling's polished exterior, the pressure began to mount. Emily uncovered an anonymous source, a former accountant for one of Sterling's shell companies. The source, a middle-aged man named Peter Crowley, agreed to meet in secret. His hands trembled as he handed over a USB drive. "This has everything," Peter whispered. "Transactions, offshore accounts, internal memos." Sterling thought he was untouchable. The drive contained damning evidence, direct communications between Sterling and gang leaders, detailed plans to incite violence, and instructions on laundering money through fake charities. "This is the smoking gun," Emily said, her voice tinged with awe. As Davis prepared for trial, Lena and Emily launched a media campaign to counter Sterling's narrative. They released interviews with victims, highlighted the evidence, and exposed Sterling's tactics. The tide began to turn. News anchors debated the implications of Sterling's empire, and public outrage grew. "Keep the pressure on," Davis told them. "The jury pool is watching." Sterling's response was ruthless. Peter Crowley's home was ransacked, and he received anonymous threats. Lena found herself shadowed by unmarked cars, a constant reminder of the risks she faced. "This is what he does," Lena said, her voice grim. "He scares people into silence." But Peter refused to back down, and Lena's resolve only deepened. "We're too close to stop now," she told Emily. "He's desperate, and that means we're winning." The section ends with Lena standing outside the courthouse, watching as Sterling's legal team entered, flanked by reporters and cameras. The trial was imminent, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Lena glanced at Emily and Logan, their determination mirroring her own. "This is it," Lena said, "no turning back." The trial promised to be a battle of wills, and Lena was ready to fight with everything she had. The courtroom was packed. The tension was palpable as Nathan Sterling entered, flanked by his high-priced legal team. He wore his signature smirk, projecting confidence, but Lena could see the cracks beneath the surface. Attorney Davis stood, commanding the attention of the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about power and greed. Nathan Sterling used fear, violence, and manipulation to build his empire. We will prove that he funded hate groups, orchestrated crimes, and destroyed lives, all to line his pockets." Sterling's lead attorney, Victor Reynolds, countered with equal fervor. "My client is a philanthropist and a businessman. These accusations are baseless, and the prosecution's so-called evidence is circumstantial at best. This trial is nothing more than a smear campaign." Lena sat in the gallery, her fists clenched. This wasn't just about Sterling, it was about every victim who had been silenced. The prosecution called their first witnesses, residents from neighborhoods targeted by Sterling's network. Each testimony painted a grim picture of fear and displacement. Mrs. Daniels, the elderly shopkeeper Lena had met at the town hall, recounted the night her store was burned. "They told me it wasn't safe," she said, her voice trembling. "But it wasn't just criminals, it was planned, coordinated." Victor Reynolds cross-examined her ruthlessly, attempting to sow doubt. "Mrs. Daniels, isn't it possible these events were random acts of violence?" She held her ground. "No, they wanted us gone, and they succeeded." Next, Mitch Scruff Taylor testified, visibly nervous but determined. He confirmed Sterling's orders to incite chaos and revealed the payments funneled to gangs through shell companies. Reynolds attacked his credibility. "Mr. Taylor, you're a known criminal. Why should the jury believe anything you say?" "Because it's the truth," Mitch replied, his voice steady. When Davis called Lena to the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She recounted the attack in the park, the investigation, and the evidence she uncovered. "Ms. Carter," Davis asked, "why did you pursue this case?" Lena's voice was firm. "Because I've seen what happens when bullies like Sterling go unchecked. I fought for justice overseas, and I'll fight for it here." Reynolds' cross-examination was brutal. Ms. Carter, isn't it true that you've been accused of excessive force in the past? I've been trained to protect myself and others. Lena replied, but I've never used force unnecessarily. Reynolds smirked, and yet, you've left a trail of violence in your wake. Lena met his gaze. The only trail here is the one leading back to Sterling. The trial reached a turning point when Davis introduced the evidence from Peter Crowley, the encrypted emails and financial records linking Sterling directly to the crimes. This, Davis said, holding up a document, is a payment from one of Sterling's shell companies to Rick Harris' gang. Dated the day before an arson attack. The memo line reads, "Neighborhood clearance." The jury murmured as Davis projected more emails, showing Sterling's explicit instructions to incite fear and violence. Sterling's expression finally faltered. Reynolds tried to discredit the evidence, claiming it was fabricated or taken out of context. But Davis was relentless, connecting each piece to Sterling's network with precision. The courtroom was abuzz when Davis called Peter Crowley to the stand. "I worked for Sterling for 10 years. Crowley began. I handled his financials, including the accounts used to fund these hate groups." Reynolds pounced. "Mr. Crowley, you were fired from Sterling's company, weren't you? Isn't this testimony just retaliation?" Crowley shook his head. "I left because I couldn't live with myself. I have nothing to gain here except the truth." The jury watched intently as Crowley detailed how Sterling's empire operated. His testimony was clear, concise, and devastating. When Nathan Sterling took the stand, his demeanor was calm, almost smug. He denied everything, portraying himself as a victim of overzealous prosecutors. "I've dedicated my life to helping communities," he said, his voice dripping with sincerity. "These accusations are outrageous." Davis's cross-examination was razor-sharp. "Mr. Sterling, can you explain why your shell companies made payments to known hate groups?" Sterling dodged. "Those payments were misappropriated. I had no knowledge of their true purpose." Davis leaned closer. "Then how do you explain the emails bearing your name? Giving explicit instructions?" Sterling hesitated for the first time. "I can't control everything in my organization." Davis delivered her final blow. "But you controlled enough to profit from the chaos, didn't you?" The jury deliberated for 2 days, each moment stretching into eternity. Lena paced outside the courthouse, her mind racing. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom was silent. "We find the defendant, Nathan Sterling, guilty on all charges." The gallery erupted in cheers and gasps. Sterling's face turned pale, his composure finally cracking as the judge sentenced him to decades in prison. Lena sat in the courthouse lobby, the weight of the trial lifting slightly from her shoulders. Emily joined her, handing over a coffee. "You did it," Emily said, smiling. "We all did," Lena replied, "but this is just one battle. There's still so much to fix." Outside, a crowd of supporters chanted for justice, their voices a powerful reminder of the change they had ignited. The sun was setting as Lena exited the courthouse, the golden light casting long shadows over the gathered crowd. They erupted into cheers the moment they saw her, a wave of energy that nearly overwhelmed her. Signs declaring, "Justice for all," and "End the hate," waved high above the sea of people. Emily was by her side, her camera capturing every moment. "This is history, Lena," she said with a grin. Lena took a deep breath, stepping forward to address the crowd. "Today, we proved that no one is above the law." Nathan Sterling thought his power and money made him untouchable. He was wrong, but this is just the beginning. The fight against hate, against systemic injustice, isn't over. Together, we'll keep pushing forward. Her words were met with thunderous applause. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt a glimmer of hope. In the weeks following the trial, Sterling's empire crumbled. Investigations spurred by the trial unearthed more evidence, leading to the arrests of his associates and the dismantling of his network. Officer Logan played a pivotal role in coordinating raids on Sterling's properties, ensuring no stone was left unturned. He met Lena outside one such raid, a satisfied smile on his face. "They're scrambling," Logan said, holding up a confiscated ledger. "This whole operation is falling apart, and it'll stay that way," Lena replied, her voice firm. Emily's exposés gained national attention, turning the spotlight on systemic issues beyond Sterling's case. The stories of victims, once silenced, now resonated across the country. One evening, Emily showed Lena a message from Mrs. Daniels, the elderly shopkeeper. She wrote to thank us, Emily said, her voice soft. She reopened her store last week. She said the community rallied around her. Lena smiled. That's what this was all about. But the stories weren't all victories. Many victims still struggled to rebuild. Their lives forever changed by Sterling's actions. It was a stark reminder of how much work remained. Lena returned to Oak Ridge Park, the place where it all began. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and children's laughter once again filled the air. She sat on a bench, her thoughts drifting to the journey she'd taken. She had faced violence, fear, and the weight of a system designed to protect the powerful. But she had also seen resilience, courage, and the power of community. Emily joined her, handing over a coffee. You thinking about what's next? Always, Lena replied. This fight isn't over, but for now, I think I'll just enjoy the quiet. They sat in companionable silence, the world moving on around them. The peace didn't last long. A week later, Lena received a call from a civil rights organization. They wanted her to speak at an upcoming rally, to share her story and inspire others. Me? A public speaker? Lena said with a laugh. Why not? Emily replied. You've already inspired so many people. This is just the next step. Lena hesitated, then nodded. Okay, let's do it. Her journey had started with a fight for survival. But now it was about so much more, empowering others to stand up, speak out, and demand justice. The section ends with Lena standing at the podium of a packed auditorium, the crowd hanging on her every word. This fight isn't about one person or one case, she said, her voice strong and clear. It's about all of us, standing together against hate and injustice. And as long as I have breath, I'll keep fighting. Will you? The crowd erupted into applause, a powerful affirmation of unity and hope. Lena stepped back, a small smile on her face. This wasn't the end of her journey, it was only the beginning. The days following Lena's speech were a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and planning sessions. Her story had galvanized communities, drawing attention to systemic injustice in ways that went beyond Nathan Sterling's trial. Lena found herself at the center of a growing movement. Organizations fighting for racial equality, social justice, and legal reform reached out, eager to collaborate. Her inbox was flooded with messages from people inspired by her courage. But the victory was bittersweet. Sterling's conviction had dismantled a major network of hate and corruption. But many victims still struggled to recover. Lena knew that for every Nathan Sterling brought to justice, there were countless others waiting in the shadows. Lena returned to Oak Ridge Park one morning. This time not for a jog but for a community event. A crowd gathered to plant trees and revitalize the park, once a place of violence, now a symbol of resilience. Mrs. Daniels was there, handing out refreshments, her eyes shining with gratitude. Logan supervised a group of kids painting a mural, while Emily interviewed volunteers for another article. Lena knelt in the dirt, planting a sapling as children played nearby. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Growth took time, effort, and care, but it always started with a single step. As she stood to stretch, Emily approached with a clipboard. I've got news, she said, grinning. Good or bad? Lena asked. Good. The state's launching an inquiry into systemic corruption in law enforcement and real estate. Sterling's case opened the floodgates. Lena nodded. About time. The inquiry led to widespread reform initiatives. Lena was invited to testify before state legislators, sharing her insights from the Sterling case. It was a surreal experience. Sitting in a formal hearing room, her words carrying weight in shaping future policies. You've become quite the activist, Emily teased afterward. Never thought I'd be here, Lena admitted, but if it helps prevent another Sterling, it's worth it. Her testimony spurred funding for community programs and stricter regulations on real estate practices, ensuring that no one could exploit fear for profit again. As life settled into a new normal, Lena found herself reflecting on the cost of her fight. The sleepless nights, the threats, and the constant vigilance had taken their toll. One evening, as she sifted through old photographs of her military days, Lena was struck by the parallels. She had faced enemies on foreign soil and now confronted them at home. A call from her old commanding officer interrupted her thoughts. Carter, the familiar voice said, heard about your work. You've always been a fighter. Just doing what needs to be done. Lena replied. Take care of yourself, he said, The world needs you in the long haul. Months later, Lena established a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of systemic violence and corruption. Named the Oak Ridge Justice Initiative, it provided legal aid, counseling, and resources to those in need. The foundation's launch event drew a diverse crowd, community leaders, activists, and everyday citizens united by a shared vision. This isn't just about what's been done, Lena said in her speech. It's about what we'll do together. Justice isn't a destination, it's a journey. Emily stood in the back, capturing the moment. You've come a long way, she said when Lena stepped off the stage. And we've got a long way to go, Lena replied, smiling. The story came full circle one morning as Lena sat on the same park bench where her journey began. The air was crisp, the sun rising over Oak Ridge Park, now bustling with life. A young woman approached hesitantly. Ms. Carter, I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it's inspiring. You gave people like me hope. Lena smiled warmly. You don't need me for hope. You've got it in you already. Use it. As the woman walked away, Lena watched the world come alive around her. She thought about everything she had fought for and everything left to do. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Lena felt that they were on the right path. The novel ends with a powerful image. Lena standing as the sun rises higher in the sky, illuminating the park. The camera pans out metaphorically, leaving readers with a sense of hope, renewal, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit.